Hey, how's it going? So, the whole trans thing, LGBTQP plus thing, that whole scene, right? And all the craziness that's going on with regards to Trump, because like to the rest of the world, you know what it looks like, the whole arrest of Trump and so forth? It looks like the power in charge of some country decided to imprison his most likely opponent in his next election. Okay, it looks like everything that the United States is supposed to be against, right? But okay, let's leave that all aside. I really want to focus on the trans thing, the LGBTQP plus thing, all that stuff, the social stuff, and the racial stuff, and the racial violence, and so on and so forth. So you got to keep in mind that one of the most powerful things that the American regime had, insofar as convincing the rest of the world that the United States was in the right insofar as foreign policy issues are concerned, is because the United States seemed to work so well. You see, in the United States in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and into the early 2000s, there was this sense that, the popular culture that was shown, the whole cultural zeitgeist that the United States projected around the world seemed to be several things. It seemed to be relatively wholesome, although the sexual freedom was a little bit much in some countries, right? But altogether wholesome and straightforward, and it seemed that this created a very productive and materially plentiful country. And so a lot of countries outside of the United States, of course, would view this and say, the Americans seem to be giving us a viable model. And this was especially the case during the Cold War. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union seemed very industrial and gray, and they might have produced all kinds of, billions of tons of steel or whatever, but it seemed a miserable life. Whereas the American life seemed happy and fundamentally wholesome. That's something that I want to emphasize here. Fundamentally wholesome. But now the rest of the world does not view the United States as fundamentally wholesome. Now do they? I mean, people in the United States are kind of outraged because of all the sexual craziness going on. And they are particularly disturbed in the United States about this being, taught to children. I'm the father of small children myself. I used to be a small child myself. I know what age it is appropriate to be discussing sexuality, just general reproductive sexuality, let alone the kind of far out stuff that is being pushed on kindergarteners, first and second and third graders, kids who have no idea about this stuff and should not have any idea about this stuff. In the United States, people are kind of outraged, and with good reason, of course. A lot of parents in particular are outraged because they're being taught this stuff. Their children are being taught this stuff behind their backs. Parents, too, are freaking out because some of their children around puberty and immediately after puberty are being brainwashed by their teachers into going down the whole trans escalator thing. And that freaks them out. How do you think the rest of the world reacts to that? Now, this might seem a trivial issue, but it's actually not. It's actually very, very serious. Because, see, the Chinese, whatsoever you might think of them, they project onto the world a sense that they know what they're doing. They're marching along, building up their industry and their riches. And what you see from China seems to be a society that is, all in all, running well, all in all, wholesome. The same more or less with Russia, perhaps at a step below that, but it doesn't matter. The point is that the West, with all this social stuff that they're pushing, alienates the rest of the world. And I'm not talking about like some hardcore conservative country like Saudi Arabia, say. I'm talking about, run-of-the-mill countries like in Latin America. Forget about Africa. In Asia, in the Middle East, everywhere outside the West, the so-called civilized world, which is a despicable phrase if you ask me. Like I've heard a lot of commentators talking about the West as if it's the civilized world, as if the rest of the world doesn't have any civilization. Of course they have a civilization, ancient civilizations that have been around for millennia. and they see the decadence and degeneracy going on in the West. They see the collapsing social infrastructure in their cities, with homeless people taking a dump right on the sidewalks in San Francisco. I mean, you actually have to pay attention to the sidewalk to not step in human shit. They see that. They see children being indoctrinated with grotesque sexual, whatever you want to call them. They see this. And it influences what they think of the United States. Because you see, Hollywood, TVs, the cultural products that the United States exported, it played a tremendous part in gaining, if not allies, but then tacit support from the people, because the people would see what the United States seems to look like, at least from its TV products and film products, and say, hey, we'd like to live that. In fact, a lot of immigrants to the United States, and over the last 60-odd years, they decided they wanted to go to the United States because of the TV and the movies and all that crap. Because it was a great advertising for the United States. But now all these cultural products are going, the LGBTQP plus route, the psychodrama of ethnic conflict is in just about every single, cultural artifact, be it a TV show, be it a movie, whatever. It's like there all the time. But worst of all is the decadence that's being inflicted on small children. That freaks anybody out. It's freaking out people in the United States, and it's most definitely freaking out people outside the United States because they see it. They're not blind. And unlike Americans, who for the most part are incredibly ignorant about anything, people in the rest of the world pay attention to things outside their own country. And most especially, they pay attention to the United States because it is the global hegemon, although that position is rapidly deteriorating. But you see my point. They are paying attention to the craziness going on in the United States, and they want no part of it, none whatsoever. They see it, and they say, we don't want to go down that route. We don't want to castrate our little boys and have our little girls, lop off their breasts and start going into all kinds of medications to become more like a boy. They don't want any of that shit. They see it as decadent. And that's the key issue. The rest of the world is seeing the United States, because of the social chaos going on there right now, they see it as a decaying empire, and they want no part of it. They don't want to emulate it. On the contrary, they want to run away from it. And whatever you might think of the Eurasian alliance between Russia and China, at least they seem to have their heads screwed on straight as to how to treat small children and how to educate small children in a healthy, wholesome way. The Americans seem to be saying, if your little boy isn't performing fellatio by age 10, then there's something wrong with him. You see my point? It freaks out the rest of the world. And because of it, people don't want to emulate the United States. And because of it, they start seeing the insanity and the social chaos going on in the United States. And they see the insanity and stupidity of American foreign policy. And they're putting 2 plus 2 together. And they're not saying that it's 5. They're saying it's 4. They're saying it's the decay of the hegemon. The hegemon is going insane. I just want to put this out there because I don't think it's anything that anybody really discusses, but they ought to. What the United States is putting out to the rest of the world scares the rest of the world. Whereas in the 60s and 70s and the 80s and the 90s, people wanted to emulate the lives of the Americans. Now they want no part of that because they see the craziness going on. They're sophisticated. And the best people in the rest of the world, rather than want to go to the United States, they want to stay away from the United States and make sure that that insanity is not catching, that it's not like a mental virus that will inflict their own countries. Now, I'm sure a lot of people are going to watch this video and say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Who gives a shit about TVs and movies and shit? People do. People care about the commercial. Recently, I think it was Bud Light, some beer brand, decided to have this trans guy or girl or it, I don't know, if I'm misgendering or mispronouncing this person, I'm sorry. Oh. Anyway, Bud Light, started airing this endorsement by this person, this individual. And, I'm 55. I've been around the block. I've seen a lot of crazy shit in my time, but I see these commercials and I'm like fucking horrified. It's just fucking weird. Do you think I'm going to buy Bud Light? No. Kid Rock did a video of his own, with a shotgun or some weapon of some sort, shooting up a case of Bud Light, right? I think a lot of people in the United States feel the exact same way as Kid Rock, right? The rest of the world sees the cultural artifacts of the United States, the TV, the movies, just as people in the United States see those Bud Light commercials as something horrific and advertising a product they don't want to buy. The rest of the world is looking at the United States, the way it has organized society, the obvious decay of the society, and they don't want to buy that product. Now, this will have a huge impact on foreign relations that the United States tries to have with the rest of the world. And you know how that relationship is going to be? The rest of the world is basically going to say, yeah, these guys, the Americans, are crazy, but they're still powerful. So we'll just smile and nod along. And the second we're able to really get away from under their yoke, we will. And we'll go against them because we want no part of that bullshit. Understand what's going on.